So let's begin. So welcome to the Ask an Auditor Anything About SOC 2 live stream. Today's session is for the Europe um, time zone region. So for those of you dialing from Europe, good afternoon. Great to see you. For those from elsewhere, good morning, good evening. Thank you all for taking the time to join in the live stream. I think if you're all here, it means that you're making security a priority for your business, which I highly support. Very excited to have you here. I think hoping that we get a lot of insight, hoping that we get a lot of good discussion here. Um, you know, we don't have a lot scheduled, not a lot of fixed discussions. We're here to answer any of the questions that you have. If you have any questions at the top of your head, type them into the chat for our Q&A session. We'll pick them out. We'll talk about it. Anything that comes up throughout, feel free to add in as well. I'll start by introducing myself. So my name is Raymond Cheng, based out of the US West Coast here in California. Um, usually people think of California as having lovely weather. The past couple weeks, it's been dreadfully rainy and stormy, almost like Seattle, Washington. And if you've ever, seen TV shows or movies about Seattle, it's perpetually cloudy and dark and rainy. Uh, but yeah, uh, this is the start of my morning. I'm excited to have you all here today. Actually, I'm really excited. It's a good start to the day. So, a little bit about myself. Um, a little bit about my career experiences. I spent quite some time in Big Four, Ernst& Young in particular, as an external auditor. Many of our clients at the time were global international technology companies, and I was taking lead on cybersecurity compliance audits of multi-framework engagements. So including SOC 2, we also, for our clients, were doing concurrent audits of ISO 27001, 2717, 18, privacy frameworks like ISO 27701, GDPR, um, FINMA, regional security frameworks and such. Really great experiences when I was in the Big Four. Also had the wonderful opportunity to learn from some of EY's global SOC 2 thought leaders. Some of those folks actually are direct contributors to the SOC 2 framework with the AICPA directly. Um, so suffice to say that SOC 2 is definitely bread and butter of my experiences when I was in Big Four. I also had the opportunity to leave Big Four and external audit and consulting and joined internally at some of the world's largest technology companies, such as Salesforce and Tencent. And so I really had the great, unique opportunity to really see what the security, privacy, and compliance um, environment looks like from both sides of the table. So, really excited that I get to be here today. Um, Decrypt compliance exists to bring enterprise grade audit experience at startup speed to keep up with the businesses of today. Um, I think for those of you here who are on the live stream today, you're here with us on the Q&A, you're taking time out of your day to make security a priority. And I definitely don't take that lightly. We here at Decrypt Compliance and Citel most definitely support that. Very happy to have you here. Thank you for doing that. If you see here below my name, there's an alphabet soup of certifications. First and foremost, um, I do have a CPA, and that means the firm is definitely qualified to be issuing SOC reports. Um, a designation that you may not be too familiar with is a news designation called the CITP. That's the Certified IT Professional issued by the AICPA. Now, this designation is actually an additional certification on top of the CPA, which helps differentiate professionals in the CPA world who actually have cybersecurity, risk management, data analytics, and SOC 2 experience. I believe it's 6+ years of experience in the field. So when you're looking for audit firms who are doing SOC 2 and ISO 27001 and the like, I'd recommend that not just looking for someone who has the CPA, but look for somebody who has the CITP because that's demonstrated experience in the profession. Other certifications include a CISSP, CIPP, that's a privacy certification, CISA and the like. But enough about me. Again, happy that you're all here. If you have any questions that are coming to mind about SOC 2, about the audit process, about the experiences that an auditor has, why do audits happen a certain way? Why are people taking different approaches? Um, Maybe you had a certain experience with an audit firm in the past, and maybe you're reflecting on that and you're wondering, you know, how do things go that way? What maybe was the reason why um, things happened the way that they did? Uh, I'm happy to lend a perspective on that as well. Right. Let's take a quick poll now that we're a few minutes in. And this is one of my first times using this platform. So let me see if I could find the surveys button and we can open this up. So, how long do you think it takes to get SOC 2 compliant? I'll give everyone a brief moment to complete that. A couple more folks. How long do you think it takes to get SOC 2 compliant? I realize this is a pretty broad question. We're looking at, are we talking about from start to finish? Are we talking about a company that's done this before in previous periods? Maybe you have someone on the team who has experience in compliance. Maybe they've done this before. They've kind of already gotten things up to speed, so to speak. All right. One last moment. I'll close it up in about 10 seconds. And we'll share results. So, how long do you think it takes to get SOC 2 compliant? All of you answered about 6 months. So, I would say that is a conservative estimate. In today's environment, there are a lot of opportunities using new solutions that make this process a little bit smoother. Um, 6 months is a good answer, right? In the traditional sense, um, in I would say the older paradigm, a few years ago, maybe 5, 6 years ago, that is definitely how long I would tell a company to expect to get SOC 2 compliant. Um, for newer firms of today, embracing the latest technologies, I would say that you maybe even be able to reach that point of SOC 2 compliance in 1 to 2 months, right? Um, that's perhaps before you go through the audit period for the SOC 2, right? You've reached that point of readiness and you're ready to get the audit done. Back over to our presentation. Let's jump through a few of the slides which the SciTel team has gracefully provided me. Uh, well, actually, pretty good transition. So security and compliance, I think what we all know is that security is an enabler, or compliance is an enabler for security. I'd say that even in the business sense, compliance is almost the language of security, right? For those of you who security is not your day job, right? It's part of growing your business. It's part of building a product that customers will trust. Security is part of the objective of building a good product. But how do you demonstrate that you have strong security, right? It's about demonstrating compliance. That is really the baseline measuring stick that um, people in the business world, regardless if they're security professionals, can understand that when you meet a certain compliance framework, you're setting at least a minimum baseline of security practices within your company. Um, and why is security important nowadays? I would say, similar to what Sitel is saying here, um, it boosts sales and growth, right? In today's environment, we are looking at so many different providers, so many different solutions providers, and companies that are trying to grow and build a product and provide it quickly to their customers. Um, when you're able to demonstrate security, you're able to build trust with your customers. They'll be more comfortable to go forward and make that purchasing decision. You're also putting in the due care and due diligence, right? When you do the right things and achieve certain compliance frameworks, you're setting your company up in a defensible position to reduce security risks, reduce litigation, comply with regulations. It's not to say that it's not all a walk in the park, right? Um, yes, it can be a huge pain. So thanks, Anton, for providing these slides. As I said before, in the traditional paradigm, security compliance has been extremely time consuming, and I've seen this in my roles as an external auditor and also internal within companies. It can be very time consuming because there traditionally have been a lot of manual tasks and activities which compliance professionals and security professionals need to spend in order to demonstrate compliance and implement compliance, monitor compliance. Um, it does get complicated, right? In today's businesses, you're operating globally. And when you're operating globally, you're thinking about who are the customers in your certain markets, right? If you are hoping to build and sell a product in Europe and the US and Canada and Asia, um, you start coming into security concerns from different regulatory landscapes, right? The US has certain expectations on security. The EU has certain expectations on security and privacy, right? Those are federally regulated. In the US, privacy, is regulated actually at the state level. So you could be looking at 50 or so different privacy compliance frameworks. Similar with security as well. Um, in the US, security is not federally regulated at the moment. There are kind of industry de facto expectations of what security means for your product based on the industry that you're serving with your product. Uh, when it comes to compliance, a lot of times people are running into tight deadlines. Um, and I think that's a couple of reasons, right? And I hope that people in this call can share your experiences and share any questions that you have about this. What I've seen is the tight deadlines come from one of two things. One is you're building the product so fast and you're gaining so much velocity in your sales. You start to get to the point where you actually have more mature customers who are asking for demonstration of your security through a compliance certification in order to close that deal, right? Super exciting, but all of a sudden, you're looking at that potential revenue opportunity, but maybe you haven't had time to achieve those certifications yet, right? But you want to do the right things, and so that's where the tight deadlines come from. That last point here in high cost, I think that's again in the traditional paradigm. Um, there are definitely a lot of leaks in the process that lead to higher costs, both from an implementation and readiness perspective, but also from an external audit perspective. Um, and I keep saying the old paradigm because I know that there are solutions out there nowadays that, if you're interested in taking the time to look and understand them, they can actually provide a lot of long-term value for your company. Let's stop for a moment to go through some Q&A, see if there's any questions that anybody else would like to add. How can I pull? Ashish had a question that I think is quite relevant. And Ashish, your question is, are there any professional certifications in the market which one can undertake, such as ISO 27001 lead auditor, CISA, etc.? Um, Ashish, I don't know if you're here. Maybe you can add a little bit of detail here. Um, you're asking as somebody who wants to better understand compliance, or you're asking as somebody who wants to enter the audit profession? I think I can answer both things. So if you are a business owner and you are interested in better understanding the compliance world, you can do one of a few things. I'd say first, uh, identify the regulatory environments, requirements, and de facto standards that your business is going to be operating in. Let's say that you want to enter the US market. SOC 2 is going to be the de facto standard for your product to do sales in the US. So start to understand those frameworks. There are actually trainings provided by the AICPA, both for auditors and actually for business owners to understand the SOC 2 framework a little bit better. I'd recommend taking a look at those. Um, Another framework that's very popular is ISO 27001. It's not the full scope of today's live stream, but I'd recommend there is an ISO 27001 lead implementer training as well as a lead auditor. I think for the business owners, it'd be great to look at the lead implementer training. Uh, Ashish also said that we're looking for auditors. So if you're looking for audit experience, I would say take a look at um, the ISO 27001 lead auditor. For SOC 2, I believe CITL actually offers a SOC 2 Academy training. All right, let's move on to this other poll here. So let's turn on that survey mode again. And the next question is, have you had to do SOC 2 before? Either haven't had the pleasure or, yeah, you did it before. In a couple minutes. And for Ashish and anyone interested in Ashish's question, SciTail does have a SOC 2 Academy training, which I described. And we have the link provided below in the chats. We have a few more moments. Have you had to do SOC 2 before? Yes, or haven't had the pleasure. All right, let's close this out. So we have folks on the call who have not had the pleasure to do SOC 2 before. Well, you're in really good hands right here. I think you've come to the right place. You have myself here if you have any questions about the audit process, about who the auditors are, what we're looking for. And we're also here with Citel to better understand some of the automation solutions that we have today. Presentation. So let's take a look at the compliance journey, right? For a business that's looking to get through SOC 2 reporting. I would take this into two phases. The first phase is a readiness phase. This is when you and your company are getting a better understanding of the SOC 2 framework, understanding the controls that you want to put in place to provide comfort over security to your customers, and then start to operate those controls, get the hang of running them. Um, so we start with the gap assessment, which is about 1 to 2 weeks long. Um, Implement controls and documentation, because again, SOC 2 is a top-down type of methodology, right? It's not enough to just simply implement a configuration and call it done. This is about living and breathing um, security, right? Security by design and having a leadership tone from the top that demonstrates the need for security and remembering, having those kind of triggers that say when something's happening, you're saying, hey, uh, have we thought about security when we're developing the software or when we're provisioning access? Um, Conservatively 1 to 3 months. I would say that I've seen a lot of customers implement their controls and get ready within a span of about a month. Once you've implemented controls, you want to be operating them, get the hang of it. SOC 2 Type 2 is a report that an auditor attests over a certain period of time. Um, at the bare minimum, I would say 3 months time for an attestation period is good practice. If you can stretch it longer, that's even better because then you can show your customers that you're even more consistent, right, over a longer period of time operating those controls for them. After the readiness period is done, let's say you say, hey, I want to operate my controls for 3 months. I want to demonstrate my good operations for 3 months. I'm ready for the audit. You jump into the audit period. So that's when a firm such as Decrypt Compliance, we start and do the audit. Um, this could take between 1 to 6 weeks to be conservative. I've seen it done in about 1 to 2. And the next phase is the auditor evaluation and report. And I want to highlight here the audit firms in the space right now operate very differently. There's a broad spectrum of how quickly they can turn around the results in the final report to you. Um, some of the larger firms and some of the more traditional firms with more traditional operations, it may take 4 to 8 weeks to provide you this final report. Um, at Decrypt Compliance, I've seen um, our teams actually turn around final reports in a span of 1 to 2 weeks. Again, it depends on the situation and if there are certain findings that come out of the inspections, then we'll definitely want to take the time and work with you to make sure you understand the results, make sure you understand what are the ways to improve your posture going forward before we provide those final reports and make sure that the disclosures and all the details of those final reports are very clear and understood by you. But I've seen it done in 1 to 2 weeks. All right, let's run through a couple other slides. How does it work? Um, This is again in another lens. So say that you're working with a compliance solution provider such as Sitel, and you're starting from scratch. With Sitel, you have a kickoff on board onto the platform with all your stakeholders, integrate all of the API connections to your tech stack, customize your controls, define your audit scope, all of the nitty gritty details that go into a SOC 2 and the considerations that you need to be making as a business happens at week 1. From there, you'll have the kickoff session with your audit firm of choice. Perhaps it's Decrypt Compliance, perhaps it's somebody else, but that's when they'd come in. 1 to 2 weeks, you'll be remediating any of the gaps that are first identified by your solutions advisors from Sitel. And then 2 to 3 weeks of gathering and collecting all the necessary audit evidence. At that point is when we say that you're audit ready. And you kind of have two options from here. Either you go into the SOC 2 Type 1 audit, which is an independent assessor's attestation over the design of your SOC report, right? So we're not testing the effectiveness of the controls over a period of time. We're just taking a look at the overall design that you intend and say, does this make sense or not? I recommend this for some companies because it gives you a little bit more comfort that everything is in ship shape, everything is looking good before the auditor comes in for that type 2 um, attestation period, right? And so you have much more confidence that everything's going to go very smoothly. Great. Any questions there? Feel free to leave them in the comments. We'll jump over. So again, with platforms such as Sitel, and there are some other competitors in the space. I'll try to be independent and objective here from Decrypt compliance perspective. There are a lot of solutions out there. I'll say that these solutions are part of the new paradigm. Um, I'm happy to have the conversation. If you have any concerns about, hey, can I be using this solution? I don't know if the auditor firm that I'm going to partner with is going to be comfortable with using it. I'm not sure why they would be comfortable or not comfortable with using it. Feel free to talk to me. What platforms like Sitel do is they help you manage your audit seamlessly. They provide you a contracted advisor to help you better understand your responsibilities when you are implementing a SOC 2 framework in your company. Um, Ultimately, what it means is that you'll be getting your audit reports in weeks, not months. And that's really what is possible in today's paradigm. Um, you'll see an audit team such as myself, Decrypt Compliance, who really understands the product. I've worked closely with Sitel in the past few months in terms of identifying the right system requirements and building a platform that really makes sense for the client. So really, really hoping that you give it a quick look, think about it. And here's one more lens into what are the offerings, what are the feature sets in a platform like Sitel. Um, Compliance automation. Like I said, in the old paradigm, there are many different aspects of compliance management internally, which are very manual, right? Say you're managing your um, security policy documentation. Um, you are pulling in evidence and you're monitoring compliance across all the different software within your tech stack. Um, you're managing security questionnaires from your customers. You also need to bring in external penetration testers, right? On at least an annual basis for your company and make sure that you're doing things the right way. Um, all of these different work streams traditionally are operating in silos. They're operating independently. There's not really a one consolidated place where all this information comes in. With something like Sitel, you actually do have that. Um, Compliance experts. So from the Sitel perspective, Sitel is offering compliance advisors to help you better understand the Sitel platform. In addition, when you're on the platform, you have the option of onboarding an audit firm such as Decrypt Compliance directly into the platform. So the evidence that you're bringing in, what you're seeing is exactly what the audit firm is seeing. You eliminate that kind of that transition stage where you're sending over evidence and we're giving it a review and you're sending it back and forth and maybe you're using emails, maybe you're using Google Drive or spreadsheets or something like that. So any questions, feel free to leave them in the chat. And let me take a look at one more question. Right, one last question that I'll answer before I let you go. And on the screen here, we have the QR code. Um, if you're interested in learning more about Sitel, follow that QR code. One last question. Do we need to include all systems that process customer data in scope? Uh, Generally, yes. And I'll qualify that by thinking about the way that you scope a SOC 2 is about thinking about the service commitments that you're making to your customers. The SOC 2 itself is designed for customizing, designed for customizing to your customers' needs. So from a security perspective, right? What are the guarantees or promises that you're making to your customers? You're promising them a confidential platform, a secure platform. Where are you making those commitments within the terms of service, right? Um, so from that aspect, you then want to think about where are you storing your customer data and how is that data helping to provide that service commitment. On the flip side, if we say, hey, we happen to be collecting some customer data in a platform for marketing analytics, right? Is that part of providing the product? Perhaps, but it may not be relevant to the scope of the SOC 2. We do a couple more questions. We have a few more minutes. Another question that we have is, will you carry out any interviews with staff or review specific incidents during the audit? This is a good question. Um, I would say generally, what happens today is audit firms want to make sure that they understand your company's business processes, your company's perspective on how you deliver security in your product, and understanding of your policies and procedures. So a lot of times, we can get this understanding through the documentation that you have or through the evidence that you're providing, and also working closely with your SciTel team, because altogether we all should have the same understanding of your business objectives and the way that you do security business. Um, if it's needed, we will carry out additional interviews. We'll reach out to you and let you know. Review of specific incidents during the audit. Um, yes. So if there are any situations where there are specific findings or specific things that we found that we want to get additional clarifications on, yeah, we will reach out. But most definitely, we'll make sure that the SciTel team are included as well, because I think, you know, altogether, we do have the understanding of what's happening in the environment. All right, good question. Let's take a look at another one. All right, this question is, what controls do you often see for the availability and confidentiality criteria? This is a good question. So very often for availability, because I tend to work with a lot of B2B SaaS companies. From an availability standpoint, we see a lot of controls around multi-tenant environments. So if you're using AWS or GCP or Azure, you're configuring the high criticality um, data set up so that they're replicating across multiple geographic environments. And I'd say that even AWS, that's built in, right? If you're looking at um, hosting in any specific data center, usually they actually are doing a replication to another availability zone, they call it. I would say that that is going to be the best practice. I would consider, if possible, to make sure that that data is replicating across geographically disparate locations. So, say that you want to serve customers in the US, put that data somewhere in the US. Maybe you put it on the West Coast US, but also consider replicating that data over to the East Coast as well, so that if there happens to be some sort of natural disaster, even right, even at that point, your customer's data is protected because there's another copy somewhere else around the world that is not impacted by that natural disaster. Or confidentiality. This is also a good one. I would say most commonly what we see is strict controls around data confidentiality and restriction of access to confidential data, such as customer data, only to the people within the company that need to have access to it to perform their job responsibilities. That's what we see very often. Um, I would take it a step further. Think about, you know, the key to a successful SaaS business nowadays is really that customer service touch. Um, and let's be honest, right? A lot of times, the best way to provide that service is if you actually had a support personnel who can get access to your customer's instance, right? Take a look at what they're asking questions about. Take a look at what are the problems that they're having, and actually help them address it. Um, when it comes to confidentiality, then I would consider adding a control and adding some sort of mechanism so that your customer support personnel can formally request access to your customer's instance. Use that as the control, right? So, yes, your customer support people, they need to have access to the customer environment in order to support them. Yes, that is their job responsibility. But you can take it the extra step and say, hey, we know that our support personnel have access to confidential data, and are only allowed to access it when the customer is given explicit permission to do so, right? Make that a control, make it so that there is clear evidence of every single time that a customer support personnel is obtaining approval to access the customer environment, and log that. Um, Maybe do a review of that every month, every few weeks, depends on the volume of these types of requests. But I would say that that would be something that if a customer saw that in your SOC report, that really shows that you're really paying attention to the confidentiality of their data. Good question. Another question. Will auditors need to come on site to do SOC 2? Oh, also a very good question. Again, most companies that I see, if you're a B2B SaaS and you're operating 100% cloud native, there is very little reason to be coming on site. Maybe 98% chance you're not going to be coming on site. Where you may need to have auditors come on site is when it comes to the risk of physical access to confidential data or customer data. So if you are operating perhaps in a hybrid environment and you have on-premise data, your customer's data is on-premise, um, you may need to start thinking about the risk of physical access to customer data. And that's when your auditors are going to want to come in site and see how are you protecting that customer data on site. Good question. I've definitely had situations like that before. I've done data center inspections. Um, it's quite interesting, but yes, the coordination is a little bit challenging. If you have any more questions about that, feel free to leave them in the chat. I'm happy to talk about it. Let's see. Next question. What does a control test mean? Okay, this is also a good question. The difference is really we want to be thinking about what is the compliance framework that we're talking about. If we're thinking about SOC 2, um, when we think about SOC 2 Type 2, right, the SOC 2 report is an attestation from an auditor about the effectiveness of the controls that they've observed over a period of time. So when we're doing a control test, it means that we're trying to do um, audit procedures to understand whether or not that control is consistently operating over that period of time. Um, so in the instance of, say, um, access request, access termination, right? You're operating those controls to make sure that only the right people have the right access to the right systems at the right time, right? To prevent any sort of risk of inappropriate access. You don't want the possibility of insider threats, doing something in the system that you're not aware of. Um, a control test in that context oftentimes means taking a look at the full population of all the times that access was terminated. And then we're going to do a sample. We're going to take a sample of those instances to see whether or not termination procedures were performed appropriately and timely in order to get comfort over whether the control was consistently operating. Rather technical question. I'm glad that somebody asked it. I hope that was helpful. Do let me know if you have other questions. So this is also another good question. Are systems managed by third parties in or out of scope? This is an interesting one. I would say that the reason that most people are asking this question come from being 100% cloud native and they're utilizing an AWS or a GCP or an Azure. Is that part of your environment in or out of scope? Um, I would think about what are the things that you are responsible for as a business developing a new product on top of that platform, and think more about from a responsibilities perspective, right? Um, when it comes to AWS, GCP, Azure, we do need to make sure that the SOC 2 is disclosing that relationship between your product and the platform. Um, a lot of times the way that this is done is via a quote unquote carve out where there's a disclosure that says, hey, we're using AWS. There are certain things that AWS is doing, which we are relying on. We're not responsible for those controls, but we are relying on them. So I hope that answers the question. I wouldn't think about in or out of scope, but I would want you to think about what are your responsibilities and what are the responsibilities that you're placing on AWS. By disclosing that in your SOC 2 report, you're then carving out that accountability, providing that to your customer and making sure that they understand, right? If, if hope that it never happens. But if there were somehow some sort of data breach on AWS, that's a huge deal. But you want your customer to know that, the data's on AWS, right? There's a lot of protections there. If it happens, it happens. Um, Here's what we're relying on, right? We're relying on the servers and the storage there, but we're going to configure our instances to protect your data to the extent that we can. I hope that answers the question. I think we are at time. There were actually a lot of questions that came in. I hope that I was able to answer most of them and gave you guys a lot of value. With that said, thank you all for joining. Really appreciate you taking the time here. If you have any additional questions, Ask an Auditor Anything can continue offline. Just feel free to shoot me an email. You'll find me on LinkedIn. Um, with that, hope you all have a great rest of your afternoon, evening, night. Take care.